Good morning and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, back from our debate fuel and our few days holiday, we are back once again to break this thing down verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that you and I can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by the contents of his book, and more importantly for us as non-believers, how is this going to affect our lives in the world today? So before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy or the things which I have translated, which I'm about to tell you now, please first buy and translate and read your own one of these, an Arabic Quran, not an English one, because they're not the same book, an Arabic one. Once you have done that, you'll recognise every single word I'm about to say now is 100% true of the words of Allah and what Muslims believe today. And I can absolutely attest to this because I have a Saudi Arabian friend whose first language is Arabic, and he double checks everything. Every single one of my videos is checked by him, and he absolutely 100% agrees with the interpretation and the translations of which I will tell you now. So, with that in mind, let's get started with verse 1 of the new book, the 4th surah called Al-Niisa, which is about women. Verse 1. Fear ye, O people, your Lord, who from a single soul did create all men and women, and spread them about the place. Fear Allah, who did you ask of men and wombs? Allah doth watch ye all. End of verse. So, I feel like the grammar's pretty terrible here, but let's just work with what we've got. We can't change the words to make them better just because it's Allah, because remember, he says we're too stupid to interpret anything he says, we don't have the knowledge and wisdom, and he knows absolutely everything. That's what he said in the previous book, so we're just going to stick with how he's written it. So he starts off by saying, Fear ye, O people, your Lord, who did from a single soul create all men and women. So what he's saying there is, he's telling us in this book here that he created all men and women from a single soul, and because he was able to do that, we should fear him. Unlike how God speaks in the Old Testament in the Torah when he says we should not fear him, we should love him and respect him, and he will do the same for us, there's none of that courtesies from Allah in his book, no. He wants you to fear him, he wants you to recognise him, the main thing is him, not the creation. And I feel like that's worth remembering when we take this book to debate with our friendly local Muslims. It's interesting to note, isn't it, how God treats his creation with love, and he never tells his creation to destroy other parts of it. Whereas in Allah's world, he separates his creation into two, believers and worshippers who obey only him, and everyone else who should be destroyed. So he doesn't show much love to his creation. And I feel like that's going to be the way of this book as we progress through the verses. So anyway, he finishes off by saying, Fear Allah, Allah doth watch all you do. So even though he creates men and women and he did it all from a single soul, he's saying, I'm watching you. That's the main takeaway from verse 1. Verse number 2. You may take orphan girls in your right hand for a slave and pay them, but what they earn you can keep, although you must give a small portion back that is more than nothing. For this would cause great criticism. End of verse. So now we're getting down to the brass tacks of what he feels about women. So what he's saying here, if we break it down, you may take orphan girls in your right hand for a slave. Now, orphan girls isn't just girls that are on the street that have no money. Orphan girls is the daughters of the people that you kill, people who have been divorced and kicked out from their existing families, and slave women that you plunder and take from foreign land. So all those people are under the banner of orphan girls here, and I feel like it's been written to disguise the violence that will cause these girls to become orphans in the first place. But anyway, the main takeaway is you take them in your right hand for a slave. Now, the reason he's saying your right hand is because in Islamic cultures, your right hand is what you do everything with. So taking a slave in your right hand is so that you can use them as a tool, and you can use them to improve your lot in life, and you can use them for some purpose. And as we know, you have to be doing everything in Allah's purpose, which is his end times genocidal prophecy and his holy jihad. So that's what he's saying here between the lines. He's saying make orphans, then take them in your right hand and impregnate them so you can have lots of sons who can go and fight the holy jihad. He does say from what they earn, you can take most of that money, and we know that women aren't allowed to have jobs in Islam, so what they earn is suggesting that these orphan girls are now going to be your sex slaves and they're going to be prostitutes. So they're going to earn you a lot of money. You have to keep most of that money, but you have to give them back a small portion, and it specifies more than nothing. So you can't say, here's your portion, it's £0 and 0 pence. That wouldn't do. And the reason this wouldn't do, and he actually says this, is only because it would cause criticism. Not because it's completely unfair to the people you've enslaved and farmed out as prostitutes, not for any other reason to do with morality or the saving of your own graces, no. It's simply because Westerners will criticise you if you don't do that. Although this gives away Allah's total ignorance to how Western culture works, because Allah, come here. Come here, Allah. Come here now, Allah. He's very disobedient these days. Allah, I just needed to give you a little heads up on Western culture. Rather than criticising your Muslims for not paying their sex slaves, I feel the thing that's going to draw the most criticism is the fact that you have sex slaves and the fact that you create orphans through violence and war while you're inhabiting as a guest of another country. Just thought I'd let you know. You can go now. So Allah had nothing interesting to say after I scolded him so terribly on the badness that he's already put into the first 2 verses of Al-Niisa. But in the breakdown, we can tell he doesn't have any respect for women. Certainly not the ones that have been plundered or found on the street. It's like finding a new set of shoes in a doorway. You can steal it for yourself if nobody's watching. But unlike shoes, you have to pay them a tiny percentage of the money that they're going to make for you, although it's clearly a profit-making venture. So that's what this means. And we move on. Verse number 3. You're going to love this. Have sex with them, lest you cannot treat them fairly afterwards. Then you can have which of them appeals to you, up to 4. If you favourite one of them, make her a wife. And if you cannot, then just have sex with her in your right hand. This is to limit her hardships upon you. End of verse. So if we break this one down, this is actually a commandment from Allah. This is God speaking to his Muslims. Understand that. This is literally what Muslims consider to be the holy divine force who creates the universe, speaking to his worshippers, right? And the first thing he says in verse 3 is, have sex with your sex slaves, otherwise you're not treating them fairly. Like, he's literally saying, take orphans and girls off the street and pillaged daughters of people you've killed, have lots of sex with them, also make them prostitutes, but you have sex with them too. Otherwise, people won't think you're treating them fairly. It's like they'll be offended if you don't take them as slaves and then shag them. Absolutely insane, but that's Allah, that's Islam, that's what it says in his Quran. So we'll carry on. Then you can have which of them appeals to you most, up to 4. So you can keep 4 as your personal concubines. So say you have like 50 of these sex slaves, you can only have 4 personally. The rest you have to work. You have to give back to the community, if you like, and make sure that they serve everybody else. But you can keep 4 for yourself. And if you have a favourite amongst them, you have to make that one of your wives. So she can join your wives in your house and live in your house with you. Although I can imagine your current wives aren't going to be too happy with this, so she's going to be poorly treated by the rest of your household, even if you are treating her as a favourite. And Allah has nothing to say on this, the bad treatment of these women. In fact, he's commanding that this is done, because remember, if you don't obey Allah, you're an infidel, and if you don't do this, you're not obeying Allah. So this is literally Allah's instructions on how to make and bake and use and abuse your sex slaves. That's Islam, ladies, gents and Pikachus. It's right here, if you don't believe me, buy, translate and read one of these. But that's exactly what I'm doing now, so realistically, unless you want to check my accuracy, you can just listen to me on here. Then he finishes up by saying, if you cannot make her a wife, this favourite one, then have sex with those in your right hand. So if you can't make this favourite one your sex wife, your extra wife, put her back in with the others and tell her she's no longer your favourite, so you can have another favourite. For instance, if she refuses to marry you, if she says she's going to kill herself and you don't want her to, then you can have sex with her in your right hand. So once again, she goes back to being a prostitute if she doesn't want to become your wife. This is to limit her hardships on you. That's actually what Allah says. So you've offered to make her one of your wives, to have her in your little personal harem. She said no, she wouldn't dream of it. She absolutely hates your guts and she wants to go back to her land and her family. So instead of making her your wife, because she's going to refuse, you just put her back in the harem with all the other prostitutes and you give her to the community to work. And you have sex with her as if she's in your right hand as just another tool. And this is so that she doesn't make hardship for you. It's nothing to do with her hardships. It's so that you can have less stress when you've got all these women to deal with and you've got such a hard life. And that's the end of that verse, so we move on. Verse number 4. Give a dowry to your wives for a gift, as they have given you a portion of their souls. Consume of them with a pleasure. End of verse. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? So we were talking about sex slaves a minute ago. Now we're talking about giving a dowry to your wives as a gift because they give a portion of their souls to you. So I think what he's inferring here is one of these sex slaves will eventually become your wife, and add to your existing load of wives that you've got. And the way to convince them is to give them money. So even though they're working for you, they're earning all the time, and you're keeping all that money, and you're giving them a tiny little bit back, increase their pay, then they'll want to marry you. That's what Allah's saying here. And if you've done this, you should give them that same amount of money again when you marry them as a dowry. And the reason you're doing this is because they're giving you a portion of their soul. Like they're going to have any soul left after you've made them a sex slave, killed their family, and been working them in the community, and then married them. If that isn't soul destroying, Allah, I don't know what is. But anyway, that's how that goes. And then we move on to 5. If they are retarded, do not give them any money. Allah places it in your hand, and they are in your right hand. Feed and clothe them only, and speak to them to instruct them in your ways. End of verse. This is going to be a difficult read, isn't it? I can tell. So Allah is talking about retarded women. If you steal retarded women or you find retarded orphans and you make them into your sex slaves, don't give them any money. You don't have to if they're retarded. What are they going to do? They're more trouble than they're worth. The only reason you're keeping them is because they're earning you money, because you're throwing them at other Muslims, and other Muslims are paying you to have sex with them, and there's nothing they can do about it because they're retarded, according to this. Do not give them any money. Allah places it in your hand, and they are in your right hand. So what Allah is saying is, these retarded prostitutes are tools for you to use, and the money that they make is yours. That's righteous Sharia. That's literally what Allah is telling his Muslims is good and wise and moral, which I feel tells us a lot about his character. So anyway, we move on to the next one. Number 6. Test them until they reach signs of maturity for sex. Then give them money if you deem them fit for it and sound of mind. And let them never be richer or poorer than the others. Have Allah witness that you're treating them fairly. End of verse. So this just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? So when he says test them until they reach a sign of maturity, he's saying lift up their skirts when they're little babies and little children to test whether they've got hair. Because as soon as they start growing hair or bleeding, that's a sign of maturity. So as we know from Mohammed, who was doing this with his wife Aisha when she was 6 years old, he spotted a single hair and he was like, marry her, have sex with her now, and that's what he did. So that wasn't his idea, that was Allah's wisdom telling him to do that. So that's what Allah's saying here when he says, test your slave girls until they reach the sign of maturity. So test them from when you get them, every single day until they show maturity. Then you can stop testing them. And the signs of maturity are a fullness of body, pubic hair or bleeding. Once you see those things, you can deem them fit for purpose. And if they're sound of mind, you can add them to your little harem. So this is talking about the baby slaves. You know, when you go and pick up orphans and slaves and you take prisoners, the ones who are like 9 or older, they're going to go straight into your community service of being a prostitute. But if they're like little babies or 2 or 3 or something like that, then you have to just keep checking them every day. And then as soon as you see these signs of maturity, that's them ready to go. So you add them to your employment scheme so they can earn you money. But never let them be richer or poorer than the others. So it's Allah's socialism once again. He's making sure everyone is equally poor so that they can have no cause for complaint and they know that the authority is in the Muslim man, not them. They have no ideas of escaping or thinking that they can have aspirations in life. No. Their entire purpose in life is to make money for the Muslim And the entire purpose of the Muslim making money, as we know, is to give it back to Allah at the mosque so they can be worshipping enough. That's what this means. Have Allah witness that you treat them fairly. So as long as Allah thinks you're treating them fairly, i.e. as long as you're doing the stuff we just described out of this book, then that counts as you treating them fairly. So if anyone asks, why are your whores so miserable? You can say, oh, I don't know, I'm treating them fairly. Disgusting. And that's the end of that verse, and we move on to number 7. To a man, 1/10 of his inheritance can they spend. For women, a smaller portion, given if you are obligated. End of verse. So I feel like the addition of men in this verse is kind of, how can I put this? I wouldn't have necessarily gone in this direction if I was Allah. Considering the book is called Al-Niisa and also is all about women, to men, 1/10 of the inheritance is what they get. So what he's actually saying here is when you take these orphans and slave girls and they have money, you inherit it. And of what you inherit, the sons can have 1/10. And the rest of it you keep. And for the women, they get a smaller portion than 1/10. So think about that. So if you find 100 quid, you can give 10 quid each to your sons, but no more. And you have to give a smaller portion to your daughters and your wives, up to 0. And you can only, it says, given if you are obligated. So you only have to do this giving to the women and the sons if you're obligated for some reason. So it doesn't specify what obligation would be. But what I think is if they helped you in the ordinance, if they helped you to obtain these orphans, if they were part of your little gang pillaging attack, then obviously you're going to owe them some money and you give them 1/10 of what you find. We move on. The last verse of today, verse number 8. Give them more if their relatives are present for it, for they might have cause to criticise your ways. End of verse. I don't know whether you've noticed this. Allah's very, very concerned with being criticised by us Westerners, because I can't imagine Muslims are going to criticise this when they're doing it themselves, because they're doing this. So every time he says cause for criticism, he's talking about us over here, us Christians and Jews criticising. So even though we're evil demons and we should be killed and we're mind controlled by Allah's disease, as he's told us in the past, he's very worried about our criticisms. That's interesting, isn't it? That's something you can bring up in your debates with Muslims, is you can say, why is Allah so preoccupied with heading off criticism from us? Perhaps he knows in his head and in his heart, if he's got one, that this is evil, immoral and disgusting. And he just doesn't want to tell his Muslims because they're living in darkness. They have no idea. They think his order is righteous. Maybe that's why he doesn't like to be criticised. And he's saying, give them more if the relatives are present. So it's almost like he knows he's being really stingy with this give them 1/10 thing, only if you're obligated. If their whole family's there, give them more to give the impression that you're really generous and kind. And that's what Islam is all about, giving the impression that you're generous and kind when actually you're stingy, evil and immoral. And we know this from our previous readings of this book. So that's the end of our reading for today. I'm glad we only stuck with 8 verses, because this video could have been a lot longer than it is. But the summary that we can take from this is that women aren't seen as people. That's why they're getting their own book. I had hoped that they were going to get their own book so we could have the progression of women's rights. God knows why I thought that would be a thing with Allah and his Quran of the Muslims. It isn't definitely not going to be a thing. What we have here is how to procure and use women as a tool for profiting in your life, O male Muslim. That's what this is all about. Right down to the last bit, which says where their money's going to go. It's going to go to you, and 1/10 of it's going to go to your sons. And then the last word of it is, when you're paying your sons the money that you've taken off these orphans, you have to give them more than 1/10 if the rest of their family's there. Otherwise, you're going to look bad, and you're going to get criticised. So the summary conclusion I'm going to take from this is that Allah knows all of this is evil. He absolutely knows he's going to get criticised for this by Westerners, Christians, Jews and atheists. And that's why he's put in 2 or 3 times, don't do this in front of other people because you will be criticised. And that is more proof, because communists and socialists do this as well. It's all about face. It's all about appearing to the rest of the world like everything's nice and calm and fine and kindly and moral. But behind closed doors, it's sick, disgusting, immoral and evil. And that's the end of this video, so I hope you enjoyed that and you learnt something. We'll be back later on at 4:15 this afternoon with more Without Lies, Islam Dies. Until then, have a wonderful day, God bless you all, and I'll see you, lovely people, in the next one. Bye now. Allah is just a randy pervert, isn't he? I can tell that already. So anyway, that's the first 8 verses and the end of today's Without Lies, Islam Dies. For the next one, come back at 4:15 this afternoon. Until then, God bless you all, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Bye bye.